Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. And my name is Ajit Jaokar, and I'm going to talk to you about an unusual subject. I was introduced as academia by Maxim. And of course, firstly, thank you, Maxim, for the amazing conference. I think that it has really grown, and I've seen this for the first time. And also great to see Chris and Jesus, who is here somewhere, also part of my network at Oxford. So I think this is very nice to be here. So I'm going to talk to you about an unusual subject. Some of you, I see quite older people here. Some of you are aware of Pink Floyd. So I think that despite my introduction of academia, the subject I'm talking about was inspired by something by Pink Floyd. So the question, so who am I? I run various courses at Oxford. I'm a fellow at Oxford. I mainly run a course called Low Code Data Scientist, of which both Chris and Maxim are honorary. Are very good to have them as a part of our course. I'm also co-founder of a company called AirDosh Research, which is a spin-off from my work at Oxford University, which allows you to essentially transition yourself to the applied AI research domain, which is what we kind of work at in Oxford. And this is based on a real paper, multiple papers, one of which was accepted at a major conference. But I'm going to talk to you about more the concept behind the problem of what we are trying to do. So it's not an academic presentation, although there is a copy of the paper, and I'm happy to share with all of you the full paper with Maxim afterwards as well. So I said Pink Floyd, correct? And this idea came along this was actually more than 15 years ago. And the issue here is that Pink Floyd sued EMI for saying that EMI, when in about 15 years ago, 2005, when the music streaming came along, EMI was essentially breaking up albums and putting them single songs and uploading them. And now, of course, while that is common, the contention from Pink Floyd was that the album, like The Dark Side of the Moon or Brick in the Wall, is a composite. So when the artist has created that concept, they see all the songs come together, not individually. And therefore, when a large company or a provider or anybody today like breaks that concept into different things, the artist's original intention has been violated essentially. And this was the crux of the lawsuit. It was not about piracy or anything else. It was literally about the artist's intent of what they wanted to do and what was being reflected by the large companies. And they won it actually. So, of course, nowadays it doesn't matter so much because that's become the mainstream, but the concept was important to us. And I thought, what about extrapolating this to the world of LLMs? What happens when an artist wants to create something and they have a certain intention and artistic integrity, because each of us, whether we are authors or are creators, correct, we have some intent when we create art, when we create an output, and quite often that is lost. And the maintaining of that integrity in the LLM world was the problem I wanted to solve. And it was an interesting problem. And believe it or not, there is not a lot of work exactly on this space, and I will show you that very soon. And I work with some of my students, and I have listed them here. I've also listed more about their work with that. But we started off with the idea of diffusion, correct? So if you think about it from the traditional sense, from the image generation sense, these are all diffusion models. And diffusion models are used in, that's the words where stable diffusion comes from. Yes. So all these models are essentially image generation or video generation. And what they do is that they start off with a corrupted step-by-step course way to go back or denoise from random noise. So you start off with random noise, you create something, so you subsequently corrupt something, and then you reconstruct something. And the ability to which you are able to remove the noise leads you to then generate a new form of content, which is based on what you intend. And that is exactly how all these things perform, stable diffusion, everything, really. So the whole point is that it's a little bit like a GAN, generative adversarial network, except that there isn't so much of an adversarial component, but the fact that you take something, you are able to denoise something so effectively that you are able to then generate something of value, and this is what you are trying to do. Now the question we had was, and we went through all of these things, correct? So UNet and Sora and what each of them use, and they use something slightly differently. So Sora does something more, but the principle is the same here. Yeah. And then we thought about how would this work? How exactly would you add a cultural element in the generated image? And by the way, the problem we chose was to add a cultural image, cultural significance in an image, because cultural significance is quite important, correct? When these things are generated, and everybody comes from different cultures, and I can share you something from my culture, I can share you something from Maxim's culture, which would be the Russian dolls, the Matryoshka dolls, correct? Yeah. So things like that. So we thought that rather than making it centric on a kind of an English sense or perspective, we try to ask a variety of people a different cultural context and see how that cultural context can be accurately represented in an LLM generated image. Believe it or not, there isn't much work on this subject at all. So this paper got accepted at a very major conference, but I'm showing you a technique, not the actual paper which got accepted. Showed you how I'm showing you how we try to do this. So then we tried to say, how would you do it currently? And there are really three levels, three ways. You can do prompt engineering, you can do model fine tuning, or you can do latent space manipulation. Latent space manipulation gets a little bit more trickier. Most of us know what fine tuning is. That's quite expensive. It requires you to really find the right data, and then there is no guarantee. And then, of course, there is prompt engineering. Now, prompt engineering offers the widest scope, especially for artists. So we chose prompt engineering rather than going to the more esoteric and complicated methods to do that. So our target was genuinely artists, correct? We wanted to work with this, and we had a number of experiences with this. So whenever we talked to artists, we interviewed a whole bunch of artists, everybody, people from Africa to Jordan to things like that. And there was an interesting idea that people felt that they, if you work for Disney or if you work for some large company, you really do not have any artistic create sort of in, the ability to maintain your artistic thing. Correct? You do what somebody else tells you to do. So what we were trying to do was something quite unique and quite different, and we really had amazing responses from all over the world. So coming to this idea, then we chose prompt engineering, and then we said, how exactly are we going to do this? But I just want to say that in whichever way we do it, it is not possible to totally get something, correct? It is not possible to absolutely put an image, put what you want. But what I will show you is we did quite well, and we continue to improve the methodology. So what we tried to do was we tried to do this into multiple ways. The first stage, and some people already have referred to this, is create an expert persona. And this is great. So we started off with, for example, a Japanese tea ceremony. We started in creating an expert of Japanese culture. Then the second one was to force it to use the reasoning process so that this image reflects cultural values in a hierarchical sense from abstract to concrete. And then we say that it should reflect the previous levels. And I'll come back to you what this means, correct? So in a sense, what that means, if you take the example of the Japanese tea ceremony, which most people understand what that means, at the lowest, at the physical level, there is an arrangement of objects. Yes, so there is a table, there is this, there is that, and there are objects which relate to each other. At the highest level, this is a cultural thing, the respect you show to your guest and what that means, and so on and so forth. So we decided to look at research which shows you a hierarchy of cultural concepts and how those can be captured to put in an image. Again, surprisingly enough, nobody has done anything like this before, mainly because people are actually worried about the opposite problem. People are mostly taking things from the Japanese Miyazaki and things like that and wholesale trying to duplicate something. Nobody sees the other way. Nobody says that if I am the creator, my intent, how is it going to be carried out? We thought, how could we do that? We could do that at multiple levels. Then we decided the next stage was after we do that, after we create the prompt, then we decided to ask it to explain the concept of metacognition. The concept of metacognition is thinking about thinking. So we asked AI to explain its own process, how it has arrived at this concept, and it has done that. In the final stage, we asked it to create a dialogue between an expert and a critic. So we created a critic persona and tried to do that. So what we are trying to do is work at multiple levels to understand what the image is. And I'll show you the results. I'll show you actual images and things like that. And we purposely chose everything from Thailand to Africa to South Africa to other places, Russia, and so on and so forth. What we want to show you is that we looked at research as well, and this is where it gets academic, correct? So Maxim introduced me as academic, but then I also say Pink Floyd, so there is things which are between somewhere. But the point here is that we try to look at the research into that space. And there are essentially you can actually create a 5-stage hierarchy, because you can say that you can have narratives, you can have norms, you can have artifacts, and so on and so forth. And then you have actually research which talks about these hierarchies. So for example, you can look at, there are papers which talk about cultural references. So there is Edgar Schein, who's talked about organizational culture, and he has 5 levels of hierarchy. And so we try to mirror that idea to capture our thing. So for example, when I showed it here with the Japanese example, the Japanese tea ceremony, then the first abstract there is wabi sabi, which is the simplicity, respect, and seasonality, high context, restraint, subdued lighting, and so on and so forth. And at the lowest level, there is actually the physical boxes in the brick wall and what's hanging, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to say that how are these captured in a real research sense, and then I captured the hierarchy and actually mirrored that into the prompt. So the prompt becomes quite complex, as you can see, but it's not just telling it to create a Japanese tea ceremony. It actually does multiple things. It, of course, creates the expert. It creates this sort of a research-based hierarchy. It asks it to rethink back on what it thought, and so on. And it does work. This was where we got a lot of success with this idea. But then there is a second part, which also looked at a number of research papers which talked about the physical aspect of managing scenes and managing lines and images and so on and so forth when you generate an image. And there's a whole bunch of papers on that. But interestingly, there is no overlap. There is no overlap between the culture part and the physical creation of scenes. So this was what we identified as a research gap and what we tried to fill in with the help of the prompt. And so what we tried to do then is, this is the way we did it. That these are my students, they're all listed here. And then each of them looked at their own culture. So Marinda Botha is South African, and she talked about an Afrikaner farmer's wife. Richard Montero talked about somebody from Trinidad, but it's not his culture, but nevertheless. Konstantina is from Cyprus, and she talked about the Russian Matryoshka doll, and that is how I know that reference. And also other things like Sea Rock and Kalahari and so on and so forth. So people sometimes chose their own culture. And Eric Chen talked about Thai kickboxing, and he's based in Bangkok. So people took their cultural context, whatever they wanted, or they took other cultural context, whatever they liked. And then they started to build this concept with it. And this is what we did. So this is the long paper. I will share this with you. So this is the one from Papua New Guinea. Now this is this is a Japanese tea ceremony. And like I said, it does look like any other tea ceremony. But the point is, it has got lots of things which by the way, I forgot to mention to you that we did 2 types of analysis. One is thematic analysis, and the other one is image-based content analysis. So we did some, I just go back here in my paper somewhere. Yeah, here. This way, I mentioned that there are 2 specific ways in which you analyze the image and try to understand what it actually has generated. So again, this is where we got into a little bit more academic side to say that, okay, we generated something, how do we know what it is generated? Other than asking AI to tell what it has generated. So I'm coming back to these ones now. So this is the Japanese tea ceremony. This is the Thai kickboxer. This is the Russian Matryoshka doll workshop. Yeah. So this was generated by that. Again, he wanted to show the cultural context. See, here it also shows the small to the big, because that is the whole point of the Russian dolls. I have a very good Russian friend, of course, now I know Maxine a little bit more. But my point is that we are purposely trying to put in cultures of different things. And we tried very much. I didn't choose my own culture originally, which is from India, but it doesn't matter. What I wanted was my students to come up with something interesting, and they did. And this is about Kalahari. So this is Africa, but it is about the culture of storytelling from Africa. If you look at the San people, are the oldest people, to whom we are all supposedly related. San from Namibia. So we thought about what is common in that culture is the storytelling context, which has flowed through the world. And this is from Marinda. So this is Afrikaner housewife baking traditional food, and this is the Alpine Swiss player with that. Again, this was an image generated with that. And this, I forget what this is. This is the Trinidadian orchestra with that. So I was not aware such a thing existed, but it is something to do with Trinidad and something to do with the culture with that. And that is all I wanted to share with you. For me, this is not, it is a research project and it is a personal passion. And we just thought it was very interesting. And when I shared it with my students, it had a lot of response to that. I think it's a real problem. I think it's more of a real problem as each of us are individuals. And in many ways, large companies and large providers who have got billions and millions maybe do not necessarily look at what is for the benefit of the individual. And for us, the individual are the artists, and each of us are artists. So I'm hoping that it resonates with you, but it is a very specific context with that. Outside of that, you can find me a lot about on Oxford. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I share a lot of things, both with my teaching and with my research. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maxime, and everybody for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Ajit. Yeah, so you see, folks, that prompt engineering is not only craft or art, it's pure science, right, to much extent. Any questions to Ajit? Maybe some reflections? Yes, please. I just say aloud.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point. We try to maintain that cultural integrity. So, therefore, what you said is absolutely valid. There are a number of examples of this, and when we looked at it, so if, for example, the song Return to Innocence by Enigma, which actually took a very specific sound from Taiwanese, native Taiwanese, not original Chinese origin. And it was fascinating. Nobody knew such a thing existed, but that particular sound, it actually is directly, and they had to pay a royalty to that, and it was a sacred thing to them. So I absolutely agree with that. And this was our goal was with the paper was to raise awareness as well. Uh, yeah, 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 yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So they believe they do exist. They do exist actually. There are some mechanisms. So if you see recently generated OpenAI images, you will see that thing on the top left corner, which says that it is LLM generated, and it that does try to track the word I think is provenance back to the origin owner. So I think things are happening with that. But to a large extent, in believe it or not, we weren't addressing that problem because it's a well addressed problem, correct? What I was trying to address was the first question you said, which is a more ignored question today, because today we have this very large sort of things, which billions and things like that, and maybe it's all rolling up into something bigger. And we thought, let's go back to the individual. So that's yeah. One more question here somewhere. No? Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. So the objective was to reflect a particular cultural context. The images were nuanced in terms of what was reflected through the hierarchy of that. So the image itself, while you might say it's Western, in what way? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a valid point. Remember that what we created was essentially was we asked people to create. So we didn't prescribe too much detail with that. But I've had a similar comment being made by on the Japanese image which was there. And the comment was generally that it's putting the ticks in the box with all of that. But if a Japanese person drew that image, that may look different, or they might not even want to go to the medium of doing this. So yes, it's a valid criticism. I think it could be improved by whatever you could do. But yes, thank you for that. Yeah, sure. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And folks, what I put on the screen now is upcoming course where Ajit is course director and I and Chris participate as speakers in Oxford. Good. Online course. You have a couple of weeks to sign up.
Okay, thank you for that. I didn't want to explicitly, but it's fine. Thank you. What I wanted to say is that we found one of it actually started with some of these ideas here, and to me, this idea, the biggest advantage of low code things, and we come from a developer background, but I think we've had very amazing success with this course. We've had a fireman, for example, from Iceland, who then went on to actually build stuff and left his job as a fireman and went on to be an AI developer at the University of Akureyri, which is in northern Iceland. It's not Reykjavik. So my point is that I am really proud of this work because I think it is what AI should be. And Chris and I had this conversation a number of times, and same with Maxim. This is all about empowerment and actually inclusion of people who wouldn't traditionally be able to do this, and suddenly we are opening up a lot of things to people. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maxim. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me, and let's stay in touch. Thanks.
Huge round of applause to Ajit. Yes, and we have 3 minutes before our next session. Mohammed? Your weapon? Yes.
The guy I introduced you
Yeah, yes, yes.
regarding the GPUs.
While we all three here, let's do it now. With the book.